Hi, my name is Barb Sackel. Today's video is made possible by QuiltWoman.com. In this video that I'm showing you today, I'm going to be talking about cutting directional fabric. That means fabric that has any kind of motion in one direction. So you can see that we have quite a few fabrics here to choose from. Now when I talk about picking out fabrics for your quilt, there's a little bit of a recipe I use. You go from dark to light, and you go from big print to small print, and you use directional fabrics because that's what adds a spark. So if you use that recipe when you pick out fabrics, your quilt will always have that little something extra. But the problem with going with directional fabric is it's a little scary. So we're here today to take the fear out of cutting all this delicious directional fabric. Everything I have in front of me is from EBI Fabrics, and the designer, Katya, loves directional fabrics, and for that I thank you because it adds so much sparkle to our quilts. So we're going to look at all these different pieces and learn how to cut it out. And by the way, did you notice the table runner and the placemats behind me? Did your eyes go to the directional pieces? Do you see what I mean by adding that little bit of sparkle? Okay, let's get on with the cutting. Okay, we're going to start with this big plaid that EBI Fabric makes. And this adds so much illumination to your quilt. But the question is, how do we cut it? Because normally we fold it in half and we cut on the edge and our blade goes up like this. But if this isn't folded right, our cut might go like that, and one of these long strips that is so nicely put in this fabric is probably going to get chopped in half, and when you put it in your quilt, your eye is going to pick it up very easily. So we're going to always work with our long ruler. You're going to take your fabric to the iron, and you're going to iron the center crease out of it. So your fabric is usually bigger than this, but I cut off a manageable piece to show you. So you're going to lay your fabric out on your mat cutting board, and you're going to find an edge, and you're going to follow that edge all the way up. And yes, this is cut single layer. So if I place my ruler here, you see that the ruler is following this edge all the way up. Mostly what you're going to find is that what is happening in front of you now is not going to happen often. That just speaks for the quality of this fabric. Normally, the top 5 or 6 inches go skew right or left, and this is usually an area that I don't get much use out of, because you will go nice and straight and then this top will right on off and you lose that fabric. But this is lining up quite nicely. There's not a lot we can do whenever we work with fabric because the fabric sometimes gets distorted by your ironing, by your washing, by your folding, by whatever. So we do the best that we can do with the product that we're given. Again, so I'm going to take my ruler and I line it up right along that big piece of fabric as shown woven. And I'm going to make a first cut the entire length, and I'm going to throw that away. Then I'm going to scoop this down. Now I'm going to lay my ruler half on my cut area, and let's just see if I line that up on my cut area, will it still follow this path that it's on? And the answer is yes. It's very, very straight fabric. So I'm going to continue my cut a little bit further, and then I'm going to go to the tippy top, again keeping half my ruler off to my straight edge. And look at that, it's just edge to edge. this fabric is working out very nicely for us. So you get a full strip with this versus, you know, losing this much on each end with other fabrics. So watch that. Now at this point, you can either cut single layer or fold it in half and see if it does line up for you. Sometimes the fabric is so skewed that you can't fold it back like this. It just won't do it, and you have to continue cutting single layer. But this just laid on top of itself perfectly, and if I wanted now a 4.5 inch strip, let's see what happens. I'm going to put my 4.5 inches of my ruler on the edge here, and I'm going to cut off. And let's open this up and see what happens. And it looks even. The whole piece is evenly distributed. So now if I need pieces off of this strip work, it will go into my quilt nice and straight, and you will love the effect that this gives. Let's go to something a little more challenging, but not really. Just seems to be a bit more challenging. If I have a stripe like this, well, and I wanted to do a border treatment, of course we're going to do the same thing and take your fabric under your ruler. See how I lined it up with this strip? And you're just going to cut that off. And so you can comfortably cut units out of this stripe. But what if I wanted to go into the other direction? And I took my ruler and I put it on my fabric, and there's nothing to line up with, because here I had something to line up with. Here I don't. So how do I know if I'm getting a good cut? Well, what you have to do is you have to go a little bit onto the fabric. So pick an area, and it doesn't matter what area, but if I pick my mark at 17 inches here and I just run it along that gold, you can see that that is going to give me the beautiful perpendicular cut. So this is going to be perpendicular to my cut, and it's straight on. And the same thing down here. If I run the 7 line, again it runs right next to the gold. So say I want a 2.5 inch strip. Let's say a 3 inch strip, easier for you to see. I'm going to lay my ruler and you know what I'm doing wrong? This should always be single layer. Did you catch that? Let's open it up, make sure I'm doing single layer. I want a 3 inch strip. So I'm going to run my ruler over onto the fabric past the 3 inch mark. Now let's find a couple straight lines and run them right against that gold. Well, there's a nice 9 inch line on the gold. And here's the 19 inch line running right along the gold. So I am pretty darn on track with that right there. That's a beautiful perpendicular cut, and it's bigger than 3 inches, and eventually I want the 3 inches because I don't want to waste this outside piece. Okay, now we've made our first cut, and we're going to scoot our material closer to us, and we're going to push this piece over a little bit because we have to get that ruler right up along that cut edge, all the way from top and bottom, and that's our perpendicular cut. Now at this point, these lines might fall in place and they might not. But from now on, we're going to measure off of that straight cut. And let's just check up on here, and wouldn't you know it is falling in line perfectly. So let's go ahead and make our cut. We're going to go up here for our final cut. And again, you're going to put your ruler against the edge over here, all the way up, and continue the cut. Now, you have two things happening. This, remember, we were after a 3 inch piece. So we are going to lay this back on itself and cut off of that because it lined up perfectly. And then I'm going to measure in 3 inches from that edge and make my final cut. And here it is, and we have the perfect perpendicular stripe to our piece. But if I wanted to do more of those, let's see if we can get this to line up so that we can cut double again. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. See what happens here. And this is lining up beautiful, so I can go ahead and keep cutting. This is my true first cut, and I can keep cutting off of that, and I should be okay. Let's go on to something a little more difficult. When you have a smaller print, it's the same thing. A lot of times with a smaller print, you will start over here at the edge, and as you run down your fabric, the print might go off the edge. Okay, it didn't on this one. But say if you were looking here, you know you have to start in here a little bit. Let's follow this path. And oh, there I ran off, so I know I have to start in further. Let's follow this path and see if I'm going to run off the edge. And we're still following. And we see that this path right here works fine for everything. So we would use that path as our first edge, and we would line up our ruler along, and it again, this is working out perfect. So I would make that cut, and you would just find a place to, again, when you find a place to lay your ruler, this is showing you a very nice, consistent place to lay your ruler. And I would make that cut and move it down and continue what we've been doing. Here's another example of directional fabric. As you can see, if you want to cut on the diagonal, you could always follow these diagonal lines and end up with a very interesting block indeed. But if you wanted long strips of this, again, you have to find an end and end point on one of these and follow it. So say if I took this one right here and I followed it, I know that I'm going to go right off the fabric. So I would have to come in. So maybe I would want the tip of this little triangle. So basically what you're going to do is just find a path that's consistent. You can see the angle that I'm taking, and I would check this all the way to see if I do go off the fabric or not. But once you find these points to line up perfectly, then go ahead and make your cut and cut as normal. This concludes our video on cutting directional fabric. I hope this has helped you take away the intimidation from all that beautiful fabric out there just waiting to go into your quilts. Oh, and by the way, one more thing. Have you noticed the fabric behind me? This is new from Katja Hoffman, and it's called Sheer Romance. Have you noticed the directional fabrics? Aren't they luscious? Well, I hope your journey to cutting your directional fabrics brings a lot of sparkle to your quilt. And Katja, thank you so much for bringing the sparkle into our quilts. If you're interested in Katja's line, visit her, Katja Hoffman at EBI Fabrics. Thank you for joining me today, and the patterns that were included in this video can be found at QuiltWoman.com.